And good morning. For the record, we do have quorum with Governor and Little and Secretary McGrain are here. And I believe Attorney General will be joining us momentarily or through Zoom if he does get on. On our Board of Examiners agenda today, on our consent agenda, we have the minutes from last month, from December. Item number 2 is from the Office of Emergency Management, where there was 3 action items that took place. Item number 3 is from the State Controller's Office. This is a notification that the federal mileage rate has increased $0.015. The federal rate for business use was 65 cents and 65.5 cents from January 1st, 2023, and is now 67 cents effective January 1st, 2024. Our office recommends the state of Idaho travel policy be amended to reflect the updated mileage rate and recommends the rate be changed to 67 cents to match the federal rate effective February 1st, 2024. And that is our items on our consent agenda. And Governor, I know you had asked a question just for transparency purposes. What would the dollar impact be for that if we raised it $0.015? We ran the numbers in our office on the mileage that has been submitted from July 1 through last week, and it was $18,000, just north of $18,000 for that $0.015 on the mileage that had been submitted.
Is that for both dedicated and general fund, or just general fund?
All funds.
Oh, okay. All right. Any other questions?
No.
Ready for a motion?
Sure, Governor, I move that we approve the consent agenda.
Seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Consent agenda has been adopted.
Governor and Secretary, on our informational agenda, we have our last report from the Controller's Office on the overtime paid FLSA exempt employees on the project. Item number 5 is from the Office of Attorney General. This is the report of special deputy appointments for the second quarter of fiscal year 24. And item number 6 is from the State Insurance Fund. And that concludes our Board of Examiners agenda for today.
Governor, I move we adjourn.
Second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We are adjourned. Board of Land Commissioners come to order. Welcome, General. Director.
All right. Good morning, Governor, Land Board members, and everybody. This is the regular meeting of the State Board of Land Commissioners for Tuesday, January 16th, 2024. We'll jump right into the department reports, starting with timber sale transactions and leasing activities. In December of 23, the Department of Land sold 4 endowment timber sales at auction, and 3 of those sales had competitive bidding. One endowment sale did not sell at auction, and this was the 3rd attempt for that particular sale. The Timber Bureau and area staff will discuss the next steps for this volume, which actually counts towards the FY23 sold volume. The net sale value of the December sales represents a 9% upbid over the appraised values. Nearly 20 million board feet of volume was sold in December for $6 million, averaging a little more than $300 a thousand. So we had some good upbidding there. On the next table, you can see we are offering almost 60 million board feet of volume for auction during the month of January, and that volume is valued at collectively $10 million. On page 2, the current volume under contract on the next page shows 528 million board feet of volume in 170 active contracts, which is valued at about $160 million. As you can see, we have more volume under contract now at a higher price than the 3-year average. Timber harvest receipts depicted on the next table on page 2 show $47.8 million so far that we brought in this fiscal year. $5.2 million came in December, with $5.8 million projected for January. Moving to the next table, this will be the final update for the FY23 timber sale program, which again is on the next table here. You can see about 8.4 million board feet of volume in 2 separate sales did not sell in FY23 after 3 attempts at auction. I mentioned the one particular sale just a few minutes ago. These sales will be reevaluated, and a plan will be put in place by the Bureau to get these sales sold at a later date. As you can see in the bottom table, we are moving right along with processing and selling volume in FY24, with more than half of the FY24 sales plan volume either currently sold or in process. Again, our target for FY24 is 328 million board feet of volume. And once again, we have already exceeded the target for cedar poles. On to page 3, you can see we are trending well with our timber harvest receipts at 102% of the three-year average, while our harvest volume sits at about 105% of the three-year average. On to page 4, the comparison between finished lumber and stumpage prices. Again, a similar story as it's been for months, given interest rates, but slowly with inflation beginning to come down, as well as a slight drop in mortgage rates, buyer and builder confidence is picking up. While new home sales did a bit better in 2023, some projections show a slow uptick in sales in the first half of 2024. Mortgage rates finished 2023 at about 6.6% after coming down from a high of about 7.8% later in the fall. And given a downward trend of inflation, there are signs that we may see interest rates continue to drop over the next several months, but we will keep tracking this. And as you can see, the numbers below the graph, we continue to put up timber sales at good prices. Governor and Land Board members, I'll stop there to see if there's any questions.
Questions? Continue.
Okay, moving on to attachment B, endowment transactions, including leases, permits, and real estate transactions. The department issued a total of 7 instruments in December with no real estate transactions taking place during the month of December. On page 2, this is the non-timber revenue, and as you can see, we remain ahead of projections as of the end of December. You can see we're ahead in many categories. Again, some of this is due to a combination of income received and what's been billed. Grazing, for example, shows higher income right now based on what was billed, but the actual cash will be coming in shortly. Also to point out in the commercial recreation category, the Fish and Game Access Agreement payment should be in to the department, but yet not reflected yet in the system. We'll report out on that next month. And as you can see in the minerals category, we are ahead of projections given recent premium bids for sand and gravel leases that we've briefed the land board on. We are currently ahead of the 3-year average for leasing income and on track to meet or exceed our fiscal year-end revenue targets in the leasing categories. And on the topic of royalties on page 4, you can see we are ahead of the 3-year projections, or 3-year average, I should say, so far this fiscal year, at about $1.3 million being deposited into the permanent fund. And again, about 80 to 85% of that coming from sand and gravel royalties. Governor, I'll stop there for questions.
Questions? Go ahead.
Okay, moving on to attachment C. This is your quarterly land bank aging report. With interest, the total amount currently in the land bank is $81 million. As a reminder, $17.2 million remains obligated to the University of Idaho College of Ag Life Sciences Cafe project. This is their center in Rupert, which is a dairy research center under construction right now. And as a reminder, every time money is deposited into the land bank, that starts that 5-year clock for the department to utilize those funds in acquiring additional lands, predominantly working timber lands, or that funding at the end of that 5 years would roll into the permanent fund to be invested with the financial instruments. As you can see from this table, about $8.2 million expires in the first and second quarters of FY26, but the department continues to investigate possible investments in land that will allow us to meet or exceed our established hurdle rates. So Governor and Land Board members, I will stop there for questions.
Questions? Controller?
Thank you, Governor and Director. You mentioned the cafe and the 17 million from the U of I. Is there any time frame of when they will be expending those funds or those resources there?
Director?
Thank you, Governor, Mr. Controller. I know that there'll be, I think Bill was telling me that they'll be billing about $3 million in the near future. More than that? Bill, come on up here.
Bill, bail out your boss.
Does not look like it's working.
Okay, now it might work. Sorry, Governor and Land Board members. Bill Hoganson, Deputy Director for IDL. We currently are processing invoices for about $3.5 million of that money, working through the system right now, with more expected as construction proceeds.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Yep.
Director?
I was close, Governor.
You were close.
So Governor, that concludes the department reports, and we can move on to the Endowment Fund Investment Board report.
All right. We're ready. Mr. Amp.
Governor, members of the Land Board, good morning. Global financial markets ended calendar 2023 on a very positive note, delivering the second consecutive month of extraordinary gains. As inflation continued to ease, labor markets remained healthy, and minutes from the Fed's December 12th and 13th meeting suggested that they would lower the Fed funds rate before the end of the year. In terms of performance, the fund was up 4.5% for the month, which left us up 4.9% fiscal year to date. Coincidentally, the same return Percy had for the same 6-month period. Resilient data, including acceleration of real personal spending, boosted investor confidence that the economy would pull off a soft landing, meaning we would be able to bring down inflation without moving the economy into recession. So this optimism about positive growth into the new year gave investors confidence that the market would remain strong. And we finally saw the rally include stocks other than large caps, other than the Magnificent Seven, and I'll talk about those in a minute. And we saw mid and small caps do well during the month. And if you look at our performance, you finally see green. So one of the challenges we've had over the last year or so is that the market's really been dominated by the performance of these Magnificent Seven. And when I say that, I mean Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, NVIDIA, Facebook, and Tesla. In fact, if you look at the performance of those 7 companies during calendar 2023, on average, they were up 111%. Now, if you look at the other 493 stocks in the S&P 500, they were up 7.6%, most of which came in the last 2 months of the year. So our portfolio has a bias where we're overweight mid and small cap relative to our benchmark. So when the large caps outperform by that kind of a magnitude, we're going to underperform. Now we've started again to see broadening of the performance of the market, and that's helped us. But those stocks have totally outperformed and dominated the market. And I thought you might find it interesting just to give you some statistics on those companies. So the Magnificent Seven, just those 7 companies make up 28% of the market cap of the whole U.S. market. They also make up 17% of the global equity market. They're bigger than any other market, including Europe and the emerging markets. And they're double the size of the UK and Japan combined. That tells you how big those companies are. I mean, if you look at just Apple and Microsoft, they make up over 50% of the tech market. So, why have they been so dominant? First of all, they control their markets. They've been very profitable. And they're leaders in artificial intelligence. They've made huge investments in artificial intelligence. And last year, investors became very confident that AI would really change the world, change the economy, and they would continue to outperform. And that drove their performance during the year. Hopefully, as we go into the new year, into 24, we'll see the market broaden. We'll see better performance from some of the smaller and mid-cap companies. Governor, I'll stand for any questions.
So Chris, the bogey that we measure ourselves against is the fund benchmark, which is 38% Russell, and then 19% and so is the bogey that we measure ourselves against overweighted into those 7 stocks also?
Governors, yes. So the Russell 3000 is the benchmark for U.S. equities, and it's a cap-weighted index. So as I described earlier, it's extremely biased toward the largest company.
But that's our bogey. Aren't we supposed to be beating the bogey?
Well, we should beat the bogey, and our managers have generally outperformed. However, we have a bias built in. We have an allocation to a larger allocation of mid and small cap companies than that bogey. That's been an intentional decision of our board, and we have discussed it with the board. Callan and I have discussed it with the board. We shrunk that bias somewhat when we eliminated Sands as a manager. We took that opportunity to weight a little more heavily large caps, but the board's made an intentional decision to overweight mid and small cap because over long periods of time, not necessarily the last 10 years, but if you look at 20, 30, 40 years, smaller companies tend to have the ability to grow faster. And so they've had that intentional bias. So when there's periods when they underperform, we're going to underperform the benchmark, even if our managers are doing great.
And the 350 basis points calendar year to date, a lot of that's the tail end of Sands. Is that right?
If, no, it's really that large cap bias. If you look at, let me see if I can show you here. I can tell you and I can send you some supplemental information, but the large cap growth portion of our portfolio, which was Sands, and then it transitioned to William Blair, was up something like 45% last year. And in fact, we outperformed the large cap growth benchmark, sort of the sub benchmark for that particular area. So we sold Sands at a good time when they really had outperformed, and we added William Blair and they've done well. It's just, if it was all in large cap growth, we would have done great last year, because the large cap growth includes, I think, 14.8% of the large cap growth index is Apple. So again, those big 7 companies are all large growth companies.
So the 11%, the 7 and mid and 4 and small is what's,
It's really what's brought us down. Yes,
and
Governor.
we can't put that in the bogey, so we just,
Well, we could make a decision to move more up into the larger cap stocks, but we haven't yet. We did bring those allocations down a little bit, but the board elected to keep that bias because they feel over the long term, those top 7 companies can't continue.
we're in it for the long term.
Apple already has a $3 trillion market cap, right? Are they going to go to 8 trillion? I don't know.
If you knew, you wouldn't be here.
Exactly, exactly. So I think we've been doing well, just not as well as that particular segment of the market.
Other questions? All right.
Thank you,
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Okay, Governor, on to the consent agenda. Item 3 in your materials are the results of the December 14th, 2023 mineral lease live auction. So we'll bring up Jason Laney to present on this topic.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Governor, members of the board. My name is Jason Laney. I'm the leasing section manager with the department. So on December 14th, the department held an auction for mineral lease E400010, which is an 8.31 acre lease for the extraction of basalt. It's located near the northeast portion of the Dworshak Reservoir, and maps can be found in attachment 1. The auction was held at the Clearwater office in Orofino. There were 2 auction participants with a high bid of $21,000 from Stedham Holdings, and detailed auction results can be found in attachment 2. Idaho code provides that the land board has the right to reject any bid made at a live auction where fraud or collusion are present, or for any reason within the sole discretion of the land board. The department completed the lease auction process in accordance with existing statute and procedure, and did not observe any indication of fraud or collusion. The department is recommending awarding minerals lease E400010 to high bidder Stedham Holdings LLC. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Questions?
Thank you.
Okay, Governor, the item 4 on the consent agenda are the approval of the draft minutes from the December 19th, 2023 regular meeting.
We need,
Yeah,
we
we
need
need a motion.
action
Need a
on,
motion?
Yeah.
that's a regular, that's not a consent agenda.
Uh,
So do we need action to accept the results of the auction?
Yes, and Governor, I believe that's done collectively as a whole with the agenda.
All right, okay.
Is that correct?
So Governor, if you're ready, I move adoption and approval of the consent agenda.
All right, there we go.
Second.
Moved and second, we adopt the consent agenda. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it.
Okay,
There we-
Governor, on to the regular agenda. Item 5 in your materials, we're going to bring up Jim Elbin to discuss the endowment land commercial leasing policy. Jim presented this last month on the information agenda. Lots of discussion about it over the last several weeks, and so Jim is back for an action item, so we'll turn it to him.
Welcome.
Good morning, Governor, members of the land board. Before you this morning, you do have for the record, I am Jim Elvin from Division Administrator over Trust Lands. For your consideration this morning, we have the commercial ground leasing policy. And as I presented last month, there was a couple minor changes. So in the essence of time, I'll hit the highlights of this, and then we'll have discussion and leave it up to your decision. So the key points of this are energy leases are not included within this. We plan on looking at that as a separate policy to bring before you, but everything else covered in statute 58-307 paragraph 5 is included besides those. It allows for commercial ground leases to have thorough review and input while also expanding opportunities to diversify the revenue generating profile for the endowments. As we said, it was presented last month. The significant change to the actual policy was the very last item that it read that the Attorney General's office would approve, and now it says the Attorney General's office will review prior to signing by the Governor and the Secretary of State. The other key points are it defines when to use an RFP and what that process does for us as far as establishing a higher annual rental rate, because the auctions are based off of premium rates instead of competing for the annual rental rate. So we get an opportunity to grade people's proposals regarding what they're planning to do and what they're willing to pay us before we get to an auction. And then it also provides ample opportunity for communication and review by the land board and their staff, as well as potentially affected interests. With that, I'll stand for any questions.
Questions?
Governor.
Controller.
Thank you, Jim. And I think kind of that last sentence, you kind of said that there, but that was one of my questions I've had is at what point or what role does, similar to other items that we deal with the board, whether it's timber or other items, at what point is the board involved if there's a unique situation of one of these leases?
The way we look at that, Governor, members of the board, the way we look at that is if we get a lot of feedback, obviously there's different levels of leasing. Like if we have a plus 20-year lease, we have to have a public meeting with the county. So we'd want to bring that kind of information before the board. If we have any kind of pushback, if it's a use that we are not familiar with or we're getting mixed reviews, we want to bring those things forward to you guys as information items before we move forward. And then as far as the actual lease process itself, our plan is to keep the staff informed and you guys informed through, informal communications. And if things seem to rise to the level, we will bring them to the board for further discussion.
Follow up, Governor.
Controller.
On the bottom of page 1 of the policy, I think it's 3A, the very last paragraph, it says the department will have discretion as to which lease opportunities are best suited for RFP versus traditional. And I know you probably didn't want to put every single detail, you're staying at a higher level here, but maybe what would be some of those discretion items, or what would the department use to discern one way or another?
A lot of times it'd be, Governor, members of the board, we would look at anything that's kind of new, like a newer proposal. We want to make sure that we're being communicative with our counties because we do have to follow county planning and zoning rules with these. So anything that's kind of new, or we feel that there might be multiple uses that can compete with different rental rates, right? And then at the end of the day, if someone still wants to come compete for that lease at a higher rental rate than they proposed, they're still allowed to come to the auction. So that's what we're looking for there. Or am I missing your question?
No, that's.
Well, my question is that little caveat that we have to follow county planning and zoning. Does that mean Valley County could zone all our ground, dry grazing into perpetuity? We could never develop any of that ground?
Governor, members of the board, I don't think so, because there are some caveats in the statute that says where reasonable. And I think that we have to look at that. And it really, the way we look at it and our policy and the court decision that was from Blaine County is that they can't get in the way of our natural resource management. Those things are exempt from county planning and zoning. It is specifically with commercial uses. So could they? In theory, yes. I think we'd want to be.
I think you want to read the Constitution about the power of the land board.
Understood, sir.
Governor, one more question. if I
Controller.
can. Up in the very top, policy 1A, the very last of that paragraph, it says multifamily residential developments. But my understanding was that this probably just with the developer and not with each one of the lessees.
Governor, members of the board, that's correct. Controller, we are not going to enter into situations where we have a split estate again. It will be developer only with our option at the end of whether we would scrape or maintain the improvements and look for a new landlord, so to speak.
Okay, thank you.
So what would be a townhouse project that wouldn't be politically sensitive?
If I knew that, I wouldn't be here, sir.
Chris.
I mean, the language about it's a little contrary to previous boards where we got out of all of that business. This opens the door for the Department of Lands and the state to get back into the residential business. And I think that line about where the board ought to be involved is pretty close to everywhere.
Governor, members of, that's our intention. We want to be fully upfront, have this communicated so that there's no surprises for anybody involved.
Superintendent?
I guess just a comment on this, based on the history that some of us don't share. It sounds like the questions pertain to something previous. I guess I'll ask, are you comfortable with what's been presented?
Well, we have, this board and its predecessors have gone back and forth from buying all the office space around the Capitol to selling all the office space around the Capitol to investing in a few entities and then selling them. As long as we buy low and sell high, it's good for the beneficiaries, but occasionally we don't have that luxury.
Okay.
And and when we got out of the commercial space, within just a few miles where we're sitting, it was because our ability, the Department of Lands has got expertise in, particularly in timber, also in grazing, but competing in the real world market versus people that trade and deal residential and commercial and industrial property is fraught with risk versus the private entrepreneurs. So I think that's why we got to where we were. So
And Governor, if I may add one other thing for superintendent, maybe the timing of what ties to me more was what took place up in Haley in the process, and maybe for the other three members to just briefly what took place there in Haley with the RFP and the process there too.
So yeah, Governor and Controller, members of the board, with that process is Ohio Gulch. We put out an RFP, got a bunch of proposals of various things, including some residential things, some storage units, but these were all going to be run by developers. That is still in process of having the lease developed that will be advertised. But that was the point. We sent that out. We got various offers back where they had to prove some financials. And also an important part of that process is, we have a hurdle rate depending on what the property is. So for simplicity, we'll say 4%. So if we didn't do the RFP, we would have said, here's this lease for X, and we're going to charge 4% of an appraised value. And in the RFP, they're actually able to give us kind of their final and best offer as part of their proposal. And we can bake that in to the actual lease terms and then have the auction for the lease premium. So anybody who's okay with the lease terms as presented and is willing to pay that level of rent can show up and bid, and then we award to the highest bidder for that.
one of the things that give me a little pause about this is you're going to have instances where landlocked parcels, they're going to write the RFP to where they're the favored bidder in it, and we need to be cognizant of that. But my understanding, and we probably ought to have our Attorney General's office look at it, is a entity, a city or a county can't zone state land, but after it moves from state land to private land, then it's just like any other piece of property. But a municipality's ability to restrict uses on endowment land is limited by the fact that the Constitution ultimately gives us a lot of flexibility in maximizing the return to the endowment. That's my understanding of it. So maybe going forward, we ought to let the new members of the board in on that discussion. So,
Governor, or maybe for Jim or for the director, is the timeliness for this month or the opportunity to let this percolate just in one more month? Timing wise, impact?
Director?
Thank you, Governor, Mr. Controller. Certainly, this has been discussed for quite some time, and Is it timely now? Yes. Could it wait a month? It could. You know, Jim briefed the board last summer on the leasing continuum, trying to gauge comfort level where the board might be on certain commercial type leasing activities. The whole, you know, soup to nuts for leasing, the leasing portfolio with the Department of Lands. And certainly, there's been a lot of interest in entities leasing our ground for commercial purposes. There's a lot of interest there. And so we were just trying to be, you know, forthcoming and certainly transparent with our constituents and with those interested parties, making sure we had policy, we had direction from the board on what we're going to do with these types of commercial ventures and where that comfort level is. So, yeah, it could certainly wait. I mean, it's the board's prerogative, but again, we do have a lot of entities knocking on the door, asking us to work with them on certain leasing activities.
Or we could go forward with it and review it in 6 months and see what's happened in the interim.
Absolutely, Governor.
Whatever the board wants to do. I'm agnostic. General?
Governor?
I'm just listening. Thank you.
I guess, I mean, along those lines, I don't have any issue here today, so going on with Governor's recent comments, but I think it's still going back to that leasing continuum, it just is a needed discussion among us because we have so many new land board members. And, you know, from my experience, the pressure continues to rise. Either we're going to dispose of this land, which I'm not generally supportive of, or we're going to have to figure out how we handle some of these situations where it makes the most sense for the endowment for us to come up. It's more figuring out, can we come up with reasonable terms and manage, you know, I mean, already the conversations, you mentioned the politics of a townhouse setup, but also zoning in some of these communities is a hot topic, you know, the tax impacts, other things. And I just can continue to see as the value of land is rising, we have certain parcels that we're going to keep getting more and more pressure on.
I like the suggestion of putting the policy into place and reevaluating, which is probably a good practice for others as well.
And if I may, I'll just add to that. I think pretty much any commercial lease that we get, you're going to hear about one way or the other before we actually act on it.
One way or another, you're right.
Well, and I mean, as an information item at the bare minimum, so.
All right, and then let's get a little finer point on that zoning issue about what,
Sir.
where is that line?
Absolutely.
All right.
Well, Governor, for a motion then,
Yeah.
I move we approve the commercial leasing policy and that we have a review in 6 months from now.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Okay, Governor, the next 4 items on the regular agenda are items where the department is seeking authorization to enter into negotiated rulemaking. We have, again, 4 of those, and I believe Roger Hall is coming up here to present on all 4. At least you're on the list, Roger, so on the menu, I should say.
Thank you, Director, Governor, members of the Land Board. My name is Roger Hall. I'm the Bureau Chief of the Real Estate Services Bureau. Following Executive Order 2020-01, the zero-based regulation, the Real Estate Services Bureau has 4 rules that are coming up for review in 2025. And that's 20.03.14, which is for grazing, farming, conservation, non-commercial recreation, and communication site leases. We have 20.03.15, rules governing geothermal leasing. 20.03.16, rules governing oil and gas leasing. And our recommendation is pretty similar for all 4. I can go over the background recommendation for each one individually, or at the board's pleasure, I can kind of lump them all together and talk about them as a whole.
What's everybody's preference? I second the motion.
Yeah.
I think that's a good move. There is pretty simple, what we're planning on doing. We want to take a look at the rules as directed and try to reduce the number of words and get rid of any of the language that is unnecessary. So with that, we request the permission to enter negotiated rulemaking and move forward with the process. You've got the draft timelines as attachment for each of these attached to each memo. But for that, I'll stand for any questions.
Questions?
Want one complete motion just, or do they need to be
I
separate?
think we can do them in one motion. Renee, can we do that?
Attorneys-
Well, I therefore deem it legal.
Your magic wand.
Yeah,
You want me to?
Go ahead.
sure.
Okay, Brandon, you look like
No, go ahead.
you're official. So
No.
on the fly, just, I would make the motion to authorize the department to initiate rulemaking on the 4 stated areas in the agenda.
A second.
Moved and seconded. Everybody got that? All in favor, say aye. General?
Just a quick comment, going back to the issue that we had earlier with the land board. I think it'd be better if we were specific about what items were on the agenda.
Okay,
Just so nobody comes back and claims that there was some sort of violation. So
I'd be happy to revise the
We'll look
motion.
at that.
So I'll make a motion to authorize the department to initiate negotiated rulemaking for the administration of cottage site leases for rules governing grazing, farming, conservation, non-commercial recreation, communication sites, geothermal leasing, and rules governing oil and gas leasing.
Second.
Moved and seconded, a second time. Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Governor, land board members, on to the information agenda. We have 2 items here. Our shared stewardship updates, as well as an update on our Forest Legacy Program. This is our collective effort to address forest health statewide, fuels mitigation, fire risk, lots going on here. We do have our partners in the room from the Forest Service. Both of our regional foresters are here from Region 1 and Region 4, and other staff from the Forest Service. So thank you for braving the cold and being with us today. And I'll kick it over to our state forester, Craig Foss, to lead this conversation.
Mr. Foss, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Director. Governor, members of the Land Board, again, for the record, I'm Craig Foss, State Forester. Periodically, we like to provide an update on what we're doing with the Shared Stewardship Initiative in Idaho. So this is the Department of Lands and the Forest Service 2023 progress report on what we're accomplishing with this initiative, which we are referring to as No Boundaries Forestry. And I will note that this update will also provide an overview of some of the accomplishments with our Good Neighbor Authority program in Idaho. So this morning, Ara Andrea, who is with the Department of Lands, she's our Shared Stewardship Coordinator. Brian Davis. Brian is a Forest Service employee, essentially on loan to the Department of Lands. He works out of our Payette Lakes office in McCall. Ava and Brian will be the primary presenters of this information today. But then we also have Leanne Martin, who's the regional forester for Region 1 of the Forest Service, and Mary Farnsworth, who's Region 4 regional forester. Both Leanne and Mary are with us today, and they will also be providing some closing remarks. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ara.
Thank you, Craig. Good morning, Governor Little.
Good morning.
Members of the Land Board. For the record, I'm Ara Andrea, and I am IDL Statewide Shared Stewardship Coordinator. And this morning, I'll be working with my Forest Service colleagues to give you a high-level overview of the progress we've made in the cross-boundary fuels reduction work we're doing across the state. There we go. So first, especially for our newer land board members, a very brief summary of the origins of shared stewardship in Idaho. On the heels of some very successful good neighbor authority agreements with 4 national forests, the state of Idaho signed a master agreement with the Forest Service in December 2018 to commit to the new shared stewardship initiative as it was promoted by the then chief of the Forest Service. This all lands, all hands approach was touted as a new collaborative interagency way to manage our vast acreage of forest land, focusing our money and our manpower on cross-boundary active management and fuels reduction treatments in areas that were most at risk for experiencing damaging high-intensity wildfires. One clause in the agreement defined a time-bound target: work to double the acres treated on Idaho's 7 national forests by 2025, and also to promote cross-boundary treatments on other ownerships within the priority landscapes. And of course, another goal of the agreement was to collaborate with stakeholders and partners to identify these high-risk project areas, and for the Forest Service and IDL to jointly identify 2 priority landscapes in the state. So looking at the total makeup of land ownership across our state, you can see the importance of centering our efforts on and around the national forest areas, where we can make the biggest difference in reducing the risk on the most contiguous acres of forest land. In 2019, both agencies looked at multiple state and federal risk analysis maps and designated 2 shared stewardship priority landscapes, each about 2 million acres in size, one in the north, one in the south, where we could potentially move the needle on reducing these high risks of catastrophic wildfire damage. When the USDA a year or so ago designated the first wildfire crisis strategy landscape in Idaho, called the Southwest Idaho Landscape, or the SIL, outlined here in green, this resulted in a request from Region 4 to examine the possibility of the South Idaho Shared Stewardship Priority Landscape being more in alignment with the boundaries of the SIL. So we met with cross-boundary teams from IDL, National Forests, local counties, all of our local collaborative groups, did an analysis of how far we could compress the priority landscape boundary without excluding state, private, or federal forest lands where treatments were planned or where they could be scheduled to get needed work done, resulting in this new Southern Shared Stewardship Priority Landscape, approved by both regional foresters and the state forester, Craig, this past summer. And here are the new priority landscapes with the main cross-boundary focal areas within. Currently, our focus is still to implement as much cross-boundary fuels reduction treatments as possible in these designated focal areas in the crosshatch. But now we're adding some strategies to help regional collaboratives or the counties sustain their ability to keep these treatments happening long-term, past all the infrastructure funding. So here's your really brief statewide overview. These are the acres treated on national forest, state endowment lands, and non-industrial private forest lands, at least the private forest lands we know about, within the 2 priority landscapes. And so treatments in this presentation includes harvesting, commercial thinning, pre-commercial thinning, mastication, prescribed burning, or any other kind of fuels reduction treatment. These numbers represent a 71% increase in acres treated on the 3 national forests within the priority landscapes from last year, and a 47% increase in acres treated on state endowment lands. And of those 53,000 acres treated on national forests, inside our 2 priority landscapes, almost 3,400 of those acres on federal forest lands were administered by IDL's GNA foresters. And the stars that are appearing on the map here represent GNA project sites completed, occurring, or soon to occur. So looking further outward, looking at the GNA accomplishments across the entire state, not just in the priority landscapes, new agreements signed in 2023 will provide $3 million in funding for restoration activities on forest lands administered by the BLM, the Caribou Targhee National Forest, and the Salmon Chalice National Forest, bringing our GNA program into agreements with 6 of the 7 national forests in Idaho. Over the last year on national forests and BLM lands statewide, IDL's GNA foresters delivered 3,557 truckloads of logs to the mill from 20 active timber sales. They awarded over this year 11 timber sales consisting of 45.6 million board feet, bringing in $5.4 million across 3,000 acres. In our northern priority landscape, Jeff Lau is still our shared position, the North Idaho Shared Stewardship Coordinator from the Idaho Panhandle National Forest, working in our Coeur d'Alene staff office, in our IDL Coeur d'Alene staff office. He's the key element of success continuing of implementation progress all over North Idaho, and he sends his regrets that he was not able to be here today to present the North Idaho accomplishments. In the North Priority landscape, here are the total treated acres by ownership. The Idaho Panhandle National Forest increased their total acres treated by 53% from last year. And of those 12,000 plus acres treated, over 1,150 of them were administered by IDL's GNA foresters. IDL treated over 7,000 acres in the landscape, and non-industrial private forest lands treated about 1,600 acres using county grant funds that are siphoned down through IDL from the Forest Service or NRCS equipped funding assistance. The Joint Chiefs Landscape Restoration Partnership Award. So years ago, the Chief of the Forest Service and the Chief of the Natural Resources Conservation Service developed a competitive grant program to fund needed conservation and cross-boundary work on national forest lands and on surrounding state and private forest lands. The Scattered Lands Hazardous Fuels Project, awarding us over $1.4 million, focuses on almost 174,000 acres of high-risk forest lands in North Idaho, with over 4,500 total treatment acres coming from this extra funding. So in this project area to date, within Bonner County, outlined in red, we've treated over 6,500 acres cumulatively. That's with all the funding sources, all of the different partners. Then after a year of working under this grant, we realized we had a lot of money and a lot of additional demand for treatments and landowner interest on the eastern border of what was our Scattered Lands project area. So we got Forest Service approval to expand this Joint Chiefs project area eastward over to Lake Pend Oreille, adding a little over 80,000 acres to our treatment area. After a couple seasons then doing this work up in Bonner County, we focused on building our cross-boundary teams in both Boundary County and down in Kootenai County. And then we applied for a second Joint Chiefs Project Award, which expanded work to all 3 northern counties outlined in red. The North Idaho Highway 95 Hazardous Fuels Project focuses on about 800,000 acres of high-risk forest lands in the Panhandle. This area is adjacent to another USDA wildfire crisis strategy designation, the Kootenai Complex landscape. That's shaded in light purple up there, mostly over on the Kootenai National Forest. We've asked for about $4.9 million to treat almost 8,000 acres and support over 78,000 acres of total cross-boundary treatments. So this project ties directly into past and ongoing future treatments in the surrounding area. So we're just creating a much larger fire resilient landscape up in the north. And now I'm going to turn it over to our South Idaho Shared Stewardship Coordinator, Brian Davis.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Governor Little, members of the Land Board. For the record, I am Brian Davis, the South Idaho Shared Stewardship Coordinator from the Payette National Forest. I work in the IDL Payette Lakes office in McCall. So looking at our 2023 accomplishments across the Southern Priority landscape, the Boise and Payette National Forest combined completed over 41,000 acres of treatments, a 78% increase from last year. And of those acres, IDL GNA foresters administered just over 2,000. IDL foresters harvested or otherwise treated over 3,600 acres, and on non-industrial private forest lands, almost 500 acres were treated with county or NRCS financial assistance. In the fall of 2022, the Payette National Forest signed a landmark Good Neighbor Authority agreement with Adams County, the first use of the county provision of Good Neighbor Authority in Idaho. This infrastructure law funded agreement is being used to complete cross-boundary treatments on private and Forest Service lands. Additionally, these GNA agreements are set up to fund additional county staff to handle the increased workload. We're helping the counties to be more competitive in applying for other grant funding with the goal of creating a long-term, self-sustaining program by the time the bill funds dry up. In 2023, we expanded upon our success in Adams County and added new GNA agreements with Idaho, Boise, and Valley counties. These are the current amounts flowing from the adjacent national forest to these counties through agreements. In addition to the county GNA agreements, we are still focusing interagency resources and strategies within the Highway 95 corridor focal area, adding new subdivisions and new partners like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We have increased the amount of cross-boundary work in Valley County, who just hired a GNA-funded wildfire mitigation coordinator and started our southernmost projects down in the Boise Front focal area, where the Forest Service has funded a multi-million-dollar agreement with National Forest Foundation to orchestrate this large cross-boundary effort. In 2023, the new Boise Front focal area came online as a project area on and around the Boise National Forest. Accomplishments this year include the Boise National Forest completing over 700 acres in the Johnson Creek project, adjacent to private lands that had been treated by Boise County with Title III and Forest Service to IDL grant funds. Private forestry specialists completed demonstration sites that will allow landowners to see what their property will look like post-treatment. Boise County is currently outreaching their GNA-funded wildfire mitigation coordinator position and has treated over 32 acres of private land with Title III and HFR funds. And the National Forest Foundation is gathering partner support to apply for NRCS Regional Conservation Partnership Program grant for $24 million to support cross-boundary work across the entire Southwest Idaho landscape. Now I'll turn the conclusion of the presentation to two of our biggest Forest Service supporters, Regional Forester Leanne Martin, leading the Region 1 team, and Regional Forester Mary Farnsworth, leading the Region 4 team.
Welcome.
Thank you, Governor, members of the Land Board. For the record, my name is Leanne Martin, and I am the Regional Forester for the Northern Region of the U.S. Forest Service. The Northern Region, just for a little bit of background, covers around 25 million acres of national forests and grasslands in northern Idaho, the state of Montana, the state of North Dakota, parts of South Dakota, and a little bit in the state of Washington. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with all of you this morning and with our great partners from the state of Idaho. You know, Governor Little, I think you and I may be the only two signatories left of the original shared stewardship agreement. And I'll just say, one of the things that I really appreciate is that we were the first one in the nation to sign that agreement back in 2018, and we pioneered it. And I say that with the governor and I because one of the things we really tried hard and worked on, Governor, was that it would be sustainable over time, regardless of who sat in whatever chair. And I think some of the information you just heard from Ara and Brian that was shared is that we've been successful there. It's really all about the relationships, and it's working through the opportunities, the challenges together, and really making a difference on the ground for the resources and for all Idahonians. Doing the right work in the right places at the right scale, and really doing that to protect communities, to look at our critical infrastructure, to look at the municipal watersheds, and working across the jurisdictions is what it's all about. And we're learning, we're evolving. We've had a lot of successes. We've been working through some challenges, and we continue to work through that. And one of the things that's been key has been those investments in the people like Brian and Jeff in those positions, investment in the foresters, and really looking at the opportunities to take the resources and the people and work together, regardless of who the landowners are or who's out there on the ground. And we've seen those successes during our wildfire season, because as you all know, fire doesn't pay any attention to jurisdictions. And I know this year, for instance, up on the Mercy Fire on the Panhandle, because of the work we did through the Shared Stewardship and the Good Neighbor Authority, we were able to suppress that fire safely with our fire personnel because of the work that had been done on the ground and help protect critical infrastructure. And we've had many examples of that across the state. So many thanks to you, Governor, members of the Land Board, our partners there at the state for all the work that we do, members of the counties, tribes, and others that we're working with. We can't do it alone, and we know we're all doing it for the sake of the entire state of Idaho. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to my dear colleague, Mary Farnsworth, who has the southern part of Idaho, and let her give a few remarks and close us off, and then we'll be open to questions. So thank you, Governor, and members of the Land Board.
Thank you.
Good morning, Governor and members of the Land Board. I'm Mary Farnsworth. I am the Regional Forester for the Intermountain Region of the Forest Service out of Ogden, Utah. Intermountain Region is the southern part of Idaho, all of Nevada, a little sliver in California, Utah, and a sliver of Wyoming, so pretty vast geographic area. I have big ties to Idaho. I have for many, many years. Prior to going to Ogden, as Deputy Regional Forester and Regional Forester, I spent 7 years on the Idaho Panhandle National Forest as the forest supervisor. So real familiar with the northern part of Idaho. And dating myself a little bit, but I was district ranger in the town of Council, Idaho for about 7 years as well. Very small town on the Payette National Forest. So I have long ties with the state of Idaho. So thank you so much for having me today. And I do have a few comments. I'm happy to talk about shared stewardship because it is a longstanding partnership that has been incredibly, incredibly valuable to us moving forward with a lot of the work that we've desired to do for many, many years. It's a longstanding partnership, and through this partnership, Ira described, we're able to treat not just National Forest System lands, but state and private lands as well, and connect those treatments. Because as Leanne mentioned, fire knows no boundaries, and we need to do these larger landscape treatments regardless of who owns the landscape. So I really would like to call out a couple people because without the folks that are dealing with this program, we have a completely different story going on today. The first is Craig Foss, a state forester. So Craig, thank you so much for your efforts. Much appreciated. ARA has done an incredible job of keeping us focused, working across boundaries, just outstanding work in the forward-looking progress that we need to make. And I would like to mention John Songster too, the Good Neighbor Authority Coordinator. He keeps us going in the right direction and we're able to do more and more work on the ground. And so kudos to those folks with Idaho Department of Lands, as well as our couple coordinators, Jeff Lau and Brian Davis, for keeping us going. Without these folks, we'd be in a different place. And I need to call them out. So just outstanding efforts to keep us going. I would like to move to the next slide if we could and talk about a few details. And so as Ira mentioned, the goal in the original agreement signed by Leanne and Nora Razier, the previous regional forester, was to work to double the annual acres treated on national forests and then also to do this work cross boundary. So bottom line, this is a lot of information on the slide. But the bottom line is the average acres treated per year prior to the shared stewardship agreement was 68,000 acres. And that's the average acre per year over the 2014 to 2018. Next slide. So between 2019 and 2023, post the agreement, we're treating about 105,000 acres a year. That's a significant increase. And some of it is mechanical treatment, some of it is prescribed fire, and there's a variety of other treatments that also add to this acreage total. But the bottom line is there was a 54% increase since the signature of the shared stewardship agreement. So we're moving towards that double the acres in a very big way. So, looking forward, which is really important for us to do, anticipate continuing our progress because more and more partners are coming to the table. And the funding through the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act is funding more and more work on the ground, and we're ready to do the implementation. Idaho has been uniquely situated to do this work because of the partnerships with Idaho Department of Lands. We were ready to accept those funds and look forward to getting more work done on the ground. Thank you, and I think we can do some questions.
Thank you. Questions?
Going off of your slide, where you share the work to double the acres, looking at the timeline, have you developed a new goal since you've accomplished what you were out to within this first timeline, or is it just keep going from there?
Governor, members of the board, and thank you for the question. We haven't established, I would say, a set numerical goal. We just want to keep moving on with that trend. And we think if we continue with what we're doing, we're going to be successful to treat the acres that are needed to be treated on Idaho. To try and set a numerical goal gets harder and harder because we're doing very well and we're trying to make it where it's just, regardless of a goal, we're doing the right work together and it's a sustained relationship and work on the ground, if that helps. Thanks.
Governor, real quick, I do want to jump in and say thank you to both Mary and Leanne for their leadership on this initiative. It's been kind of a long 5 or 6 years getting projects done on the ground, and a lot of the coordination work, certainly the funding has been significant coming to the state and both regions to get a lot of this work done. And so I want to echo my gratitude to not only both you two, but to our staff at the Department of Lands for the work they've been doing on this. And as Leanne indicated, we want to continue that trend. So on the G&A side of things, as you'll recall, Governor and board members, we do have 3 FTEs that we're asking for in the budget this legislative session. One would be a second program manager up in the Bureau and 2 foresters. One would be focused in the northern part of the state, and one more so focused over in eastern Idaho, Salmon Chalice National Forest, as well as the Caribou-Targhee National Forest, where we do want to have more of a presence with this program. So really appreciate the support there. I did get word, because they're doing things differently in JFAC, that our maintenance budget did sail through, but we'll see what happens with the decision units and the line items in a couple weeks here, and we'll keep the board posted on that. So, thank you.
Governor,
Go ahead.
go ahead, Brandon.
I just want to say thank you for the partnership and relationship. I know that goes a long way. It's easy to say that, but I think you really see the action of your staff and your teams from IDL and from the Forest Service and all the other partners. So thank you. I guess my question would be, are there other pinch points or areas if we were to unhinge those or move, what are the things that we can do even more to help push this even further along? Whether it's the G&A, shared service, these acres and the work that we're doing. You can always say more money and dollars and all that, and you're waiting from DC to send you some more resources, but what are the key things that are important? Because I know we were on the range on the Governor's Trail Ride, and the biggest discussion was recreation and all these new people moving into Idaho. And that education of knowing what the impact of all these, the recreation on these lands and in the forests, and that WUI impact. So I guess I'd just be interested in your thoughts on that.
Governor, members of the Land Board, Controller Wolf. What could help us probably the most is just the ongoing support. When we do bring forward budget enhancement requests to either gain personnel or more funds to acquire contracted services, we really need those. We need more warm bodies with some knowledge and expertise to help us grow into other areas. The pool of operators at times can be challenging, and we appreciate all of the efforts that all of you have supported, especially Superintendent Critchfield, in getting some more interest in going into the logging professions and going into the forest management professions. We really appreciate that work, and with the University of Idaho. So it's those kind of ongoing thinking, how can we increase the manpower, the expertise, the ability to keep the relationships growing? These rural counties that we're going into, like Boise County, how do we convince them that we have sustainable funding? They can hire, the local operators can invest in new equipment, in whatever they need to get these treatments going, and they can count on that to continue going past infrastructure funding.
Thank you, Governor. I just want to echo, thank you guys for your work. Thank you for the coordination on the presentation today. You touched on it, and I think it goes to superintendent's question, is just in terms of setting goals. You've mentioned infrastructure funding quite a few times. It feels like I can feel a tension myself on this, just saying like the work you're doing is very important, obviously, to fire mitigation for the state. But also, I don't really want to see the federal deficit continue to rise. And so I get the sense from personnel, but long-term, how do we continue this effort without huge dumps of resources from the federal government?
That's a quite a
Governor, members of the Land Board, Secretary. Some of the things we're trying to do are just what you heard Brian talk about. We've initiated good neighbor authority agreements with the counties. This will allow not just bill money to come flowing down as it is right now. It will allow ongoing appropriated funds that come to the national forests, and they will continue to come even after the infrastructure funding goes down. It will allow those appropriated funds through agreements with the national forest to continue flowing to the counties. So we've just kind of opened the spigot, and knowing that there will be a baseline of funding still there. We're also using a lot of this money to make sure that we or some of our contracted forestry consultants are working with these rural counties, and we're going right in there with them. We're making sure they got their community wildfire protection plans written. They know how to write a competitive grant. So all of those Forest Service, state and private forestry fire mitigation funds that we've had for decades and we will continue to have, they can write a very competitive grant fund and continue getting monies that won't include infrastructure funding. We help them write contracts, make sure they can solicit operators effectively, do more outreach, reach the non-industrial landowners that we're trying to sell this program to. So we're doing a lot of equipping of the local counties, the local collaborative groups to get the work done past infrastructure funding.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions? Well, thank you very much, and thanks for your partnership. Director.
Okay, Governor, the last item on the information agenda is a Forest Legacy Program briefing, and we'll bring Craig Foss back up here to provide this quick briefing.
Quick. Thank you, Director. Governor, members of the Land Board, again, for the record, I'm Craig Foss, State Forester with the Department of Lands. Thanks for the opportunity to present and discuss on the Forest Legacy Program as an information agenda item. We anticipate bringing several projects to the Land Board in 2024. So what we really wanted to do today is provide an overview of this program for discussion and to address any questions that you might have. Forest Legacy is a voluntary initiative. It empowers private landowners to safeguard their forest land for perpetual timberland production. Under the program, landowners voluntarily sell their development rights at market value, but they retain land ownership, land management, and the rights to manage that property with the exception of the development aspect. So and they continue to pay property taxes on that land ownership. It essentially keeps working forests working. Forest legacy projects are not funded through Idaho's general fund. The program staff that we have involved in this program are not funded through our general fund. Funding stems from congressional authorizations and offshore drilling royalties. Idaho competes for the money in the form of grants that are passed through by the U.S. Forest Service. Participating landowners contribute a 25% match. Typically, that's a tax deductible 25% donation of the value of that easement. The legacy program aligns its goals with Idaho's Forest Action Plan objectives to define and identify priority projects. Our goals are also aligned to address national program priorities such as threat due to development and keeping working forests working. Currently, most of the projects in legacy are in northern Idaho. Idaho's also participated in the Forest Legacy Program for more than 20 years. With a growing Idaho, many large tracts of forest land are threatened by subdivision and development. Forest Legacy helps prevent sprawl into the wildland-urban interface while ensuring a steady, reliable sawlog and fiber supply for industry and future mill infrastructure investments. All properties that participate in the Forest Legacy Program are required to have a forest stewardship plan, which really helps ensure that those forests are managed and kept healthy. It also helps mitigate wildfire risk. Less sprawl into the WUI impacts resources needed for fire protection and leads to safer communities. The program bolsters local economies by safeguarding rural jobs, keeping property tax on county tax rolls. It expands recreational access with industrial forest landowners, who often open up their lands for public use for hunting, fishing, and non-motorized recreation. The program also helps preserve wildlife habitat, water quality, and scenic landscapes. Properties are often located within critical wildlife habitat and migration corridors, and essentially fewer residential structures in those corridors minimizes the number of wildlife-human conflicts. With regard to who's eligible to participate in this program, eligible properties must be privately owned, exceed 5 acres, they must be 75% forested, and within Idaho's priority landscape areas as identified within our Idaho Forest Action Plan. Funding is awarded through a competitive nationwide process. So we prioritize our Idaho projects, we submit them, and then they compete nationally for funding. Since 2003, Legacy has made 90% of the lands that go into the program eligible for or available for public recreation. So 93,000 of our 103,000 acres enrolled are open for public recreation. We've currently received grants to enroll another 33,000 acres. And we're currently competing for grants to enroll another 100,000 acres into the program, which would nearly double the program's acreage in Idaho. Over the next few years, we expect even more interest in the legacy program, particularly from industrial forest landowners. Idaho is prepared to meet this demand by competing aggressively for a share of the $700 million in national funds that have been allocated for forest legacy across the nation. Idaho Department of Lands has a full-time program coordinator, and we've recently added a full-time program manager to meet the growing demand for this crucial program. So in summary, the legacy program's goal is to keep working forests working. And these lands are of great importance to the people of Idaho. I'd refer you to attachment 1, the Forest Legacy Program fact sheet, for more information regarding the program, and attachment 2 for a map of past, proposed, and in-progress projects in Idaho. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Mr. Foss, the 103, is that funded or acquired? Which one's funded, which one's acquired?
The 103,000 acres are acres that we have acquired already.
But so what are funded?
let me walk through it, make sure.
Just tell me the difference between a funded and acquired.
Okay. A funded project is, we've applied, we've been awarded the money, but we have not.
So it's in the queue.
Yep, it's in the queue, exactly.
And then the application are ones that want to be in the queue.
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
So, and acquired are the ones, the 103 we got right now.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's spot on.
Thank you. Other questions? All right.
Right.
Good
thank you.
job. Thank you. Director.
Well, Governor, that concludes the agenda for the meeting, but the last thing I'd like to do, and I'm not liking this trend right now because I'm losing another member of my executive team. That's Scott Phillips. He's not even wearing a tie today. He's got one foot out the door.
We hadn't shaved for a year.
But, Scott served as our policy and communications chief since 2020, May of 2020. And he and his wife are moving to Arkansas very soon here. But really appreciate Scott and all he brought to the department in helping us all out. Appreciate your leadership, Scott, and your service to IDL and the people of Idaho, and you'll be missed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott.
Are you that hard to work for?
I guess so, Governor. I'm not liking this trend.
Motion's in order.
Governor, I just want to thanks to Scott as well. Appreciate it and his service to the state of Idaho and first of all and foremost, a good friend. Thank you. With that, Governor, I move we adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We are adjourned.